Colin for the introduction. Thank you to EBJ for sponsoring me. Thank you to the conference inviters the conference organisers for inviting me, and thank you to all of you for coming out. It makes a nice change to be presenting at JALT and not have to worry about being on at the same time as Paul Nation. I was a featured speaker a few years ago, but I never thought that I would get the chance to, well, get the honour to be a plenary speaker. And the reason I thought that was that the JALT guidelines state that a plenary speaker should be a scholar of international repute. Now, if they'd been looking for a scholar of ill repute, then I might have thought I had a bit more of a chance, but even then I think scholar would have been a bit of a stretch. So when the organisers asked me to do this, I said, why me? And they said they want someone with insight into the conference theme in the context of Japan, somebody who has strong opinions and somebody who's not afraid to share them. So I'll quite happily tick all of those boxes, and that's the capacity in which I stand before you today. Just one note before we start, I will be mentioning a few references, and I'll put up a reference slide at the end so that you can all take a picture if you want to. If I forget at the end, somebody please shout out reference slide. As Kat mentioned, one of the things about this year's theme is the issue of terminology. It can be a little bit tricky. There are four terms in particular that you need to understand. The first of these is efficacy, which I had never even thought about an alternative pronunciation for, but now Kat's put that in my head and they get it wrong. Efficacy is a normal everyday English word, and it basically means the same thing as effectiveness. The second term is self-efficacy. Now, this is not a normal everyday English word. This comes from social cognitive theory, and it's an individual's self-perceived judgment about their ability to achieve goals in a certain context. And there's a lot of research being done on the importance of self-efficacy, and researchers have shown that self-efficacy is very strongly linked to positive outcomes. I think this term was coined first in the 1970s, but the basic principle was stated a long time before that by Henry Ford, I think quite elegantly. It's the common sense idea that if you approach something with confidence that you're going to be able to do it, you're more likely to be able to do it. Teacher efficacy is the teacher version of self-efficacy. So it's the idea that a teacher feels confident that they're able to meet the goals in their own specific context. Two very important things about teacher efficacy. The first is that it's self-perceived. It's not an external assessment of somebody's effectiveness. It's about their belief and their confidence in their ability. The second point is that it's context-specific. So you wouldn't say, for example, teacher A has a higher sense of, but we also say the sense of efficacy. You wouldn't say that teacher A has a higher sense of efficacy than teacher B, because each teacher's sense of efficacy will vary according to their contexts. So you could have a high sense of efficacy in one class and a low sense in another class. Teacher efficacy has been investigated in quite a lot of fields, particularly I think science and special needs, but very little in TESOL and almost nothing in Japan. So the final version is group efficacy, or collective efficacy, or collective teacher efficacy. And this is the idea of a group of teachers' beliefs about their ability to meet challenges. So with a high level of teacher efficacy, you might believe that you're a great player, but with a high level of collective efficacy, you would have to believe that you're part of a winning team. When Stephen first talked to me about doing this topic, I didn't know what teacher efficacy was either, although I did know how to pronounce it. He explained it in terms of the Japanese university staff room, where we have two groups of teachers, the teachers who are positively working to overcome the challenges, and the other group who've basically given up. We could call them something like the Obama group and the anti-Obama group. This is my teacher efficacy is my topic, and I'm a plenary speaker, so my job is to cheerlead for the Yes We Can group. But I can't do that without reservation, and there's two reasons for that. The first is that I'm British, and we don't do unbridled enthusiasm. If you wanted to use Obama's catchphrase in the UK, you'd need to change it to, we might be able to, but let's wait and see and not get carried away. The second reason is, and we'll keep this just between ourselves, I'm a part-time member of both these groups. I flip between the two. And I don't think, we're going to find out in a second, I don't think I'm the only one. Please raise your hands if you ever feel like this about your job. Well, I would have had to go home if nobody raised their hands, wouldn't I? So that's good. This is entirely natural. It's part of the teaching profession, and this is why the teaching profession has such problems with stress, burnout, and mental health. And I think that in the context that we teach in Japan, it's even more likely that you would end up feeling like this. There's an even bigger danger of this. Not all of us, but most of us will at some time have taught large classes of unmotivated students who've got, they have negative learning experiences, and we're trying to teach them a language that's completely different from their own and for which they have absolutely no perceived need. So it's a miracle that we actually don't go home from work feeling like that every day. By the way, if anybody's interested, I am available for engagements as a motivational speaker. The point I want to make is that I would be very, very suspicious of any teacher who didn't raise their hands here. But they exist. There are these teachers who have this enormously high sense of teacher efficacy, that they're doing a great job. In my experience, these people either, they don't understand the nature of language teaching, they don't know how it's supposed to be done, so they presume that what they're doing is wonderful. The second one is people who have just extraordinarily low expectations. And if the students produce any English at all, well, wow, look at me, I'm doing a great job. The third possibility, of course, and I'm not joking about this, this is an important one, is the teachers might just be deluded. Teacher efficacy is a great thing, but it's only a great thing if it's based on firm foundations. There's got to be a reason for that. If it's based on just a general sense of your own wonderfulness, then it's not really going to lead to positive outcomes. And the problem is with excessively positive people, I sound terrible. These people can actually, they will have great teacher efficacy themselves, but they can have a negative effect on the rest of us. Let's do another quick survey. I'm feeling a bit more confident about this one. How many of you have a voice in the back of your head that constantly tells you, just quietly, that maybe everybody else is doing a better job than you are? Yes. Well, congratulations, because that little voice is also telling you you're not deluded, because the deluded people don't have that voice. And so that's a great thing. The point is that teacher efficacy based on firm evidence is a good thing. Teacher efficacy based on wishful thinking is not a good thing at all. I said before that there hadn't been much research done in Japan, or in TESOL in fact, and I said none in Japan on teacher efficacy. Also, I thought, as I was preparing for this plenary, a friend got in touch and he said, did you know that the topic of your plenary was actually my PhD thesis? And I said, I did not know that, but that's extremely helpful. Please send it along and I'll read it. His name's Max Praver and he's based in Nagoya. Here's his handsome, smiling face. You'll be able to spot Max easily at JALT because he's a middle-aged white guy with a shaved head. He's going to stick out like a sore thumb. In the spirit of shout-outs, I'll give my shout-out to Max because he helped me to understand the idea of teacher efficacy from a serious scholar's point of view. In Max's research, he identified 4 factors that positively influence teacher efficacy and 3 that negatively influence it. The first, on the positive side, was autonomy, the idea that teachers who have more autonomy have a greater sense of teacher efficacy. And that's kind of common sense, but it's also something I'd like to come back to because I think there's a caveat to that. The second one was colleagues. Naturally, if you surround yourself with yes we can people, you're more likely to become a yes we can person yourself. Don't drift, don't stay too long in the other group. You can join them for a quick dinner out, but don't stay for the second session. The third one is money, and this was nothing to do with salary. This was to do with access to funds for professional development and research. And that's also something I'll come back to later. And of course the final one was students, because nothing has a bigger influence on the teacher's sense of whether you're going to achieve your goals than the students you're teaching. On the negative side, he identified 3, and one of them was the administration. And this is not to say the administration are a negative factor. The problem was that teachers felt that they didn't have any communication with administration. They felt the decisions were taken above their head and they had no influence in this. And he found this to be particularly true with, depending on employment status. So he did look at all areas of teacher efficacy, comparing full-time teachers and part-time and contract teachers. And he found no real difference in every area except this. The idea that part-time and contract teachers felt, not helpless, but they felt like they had much less influence. And of course the final one is students again, because just as they can be a positive influence, they can also be a negative influence on the teacher's sense of efficacy. And this is why the teacher's sense of efficacy can and probably does change from class to class. One thing Max didn't look at was the overall level of teacher efficacy in Japan compared with other contexts. My feeling about this, having worked in other contexts, is that in Japan it's quite low. And I have two justifications for saying that. The first is when Stephen's example about the two groups in the staff room, everybody's kind of nodding, yeah, we all know those two groups. In other contexts, you don't really get that. In other countries, you'll get teachers complaining about students and complaining about the pay and the conditions, but you don't get teachers who've just given up and presume that there's no point to what they're doing at all. And the second thing is a little bit more controversial, but I think we'll keep this between ourselves. If you look at the outcomes of what we do, of English language teaching, particularly at Japanese universities, it's nothing that we're going to write home about, is it? If you look at the overall level of students who come out of Japanese universities, none of us are going to be saying, look at this, look what we did. Now, obviously, this is to do with a huge range of factors way beyond, that go way beyond us. But it's something that, let's just say that most of us, I think, would agree that we're not achieving the kind of goals that we would like to achieve, and that we think we could achieve given better circumstances. So I want to talk about three areas in which I think we can improve teacher efficacy in Japan. And I chose these based on a combination of the fact that A, I think they would have a big impact, but B, I think we do them badly in Japan, and I think there's a huge room for improvement. So these are my three. Actually, I noticed that when I was preparing this presentation, I discovered a deep truth about myself. I have some kind of, I don't know, instinctive connection to the number 3. There's nothing I can't analyze and come up with 3 categories. When I do my bio, I'm going to make it, he enjoys running, cycling, and putting things into 3 categories, which is also a list of 3. But the first of these is goals, and in Japan, in other countries, when I've taught English in other countries, classes have names like Intermediate Business or TOEFL Preparation 101. The class kind of tells you what it is. But in Japan, we have classes called Sogo Eigo and General English, and my own university's genius system of Eigo Ichi, Eigo Ni, Eigo San, and Eigo Yon. And I don't think this is an accident. I think this is a reflection of the fact that there isn't really any consensus about what these classes are supposed to be about. And I think that these can be divided into groups. Anyone like to guess how many groups I think they can be divided into? As broad categories, the first is English, and this is what I call ELT. And I would include ESP in this as well. So what I'm talking about is a direct focus on language teaching, with the goal being to improve the students' proficiency in practical English. The second group I would call not just English, and this is the idea that English is involved in the class, but it's not the main focus. So this might be something like, usually there's some kind of academic twist, so it'd be presentations or debate or critical thinking or content-based learning, something like that. And the third one, and this is not a joke, not actually English, this is English as a liberal arts subject, and in many places, including my own university, this was taught as, and still is taught as a sense that it's just another subject in liberal arts. So for example, we have a teacher lecturing in American history in Japanese, so English doesn't come into the class at all, it's just the class happens to be called Eigoichi. So there are these 3 groups. And I was talking to Mark Helgeson last night at the dinner, and he said whenever he does a presentation, he likes to get in a 5-minute rant. I like to get in more than one, but let me get started with my first one. My first one is in defense of the ELT, in defense of English teaching as a goal for Japanese universities. It's crazy that I feel I need to defend this at a conference of language teachers, but I do. because English gets kind of a bad rap, and there are three, surprisingly enough, particular accusations that are made as to why this should not be a goal for university. The first one is this one, the fact that if the students want to do practical English, they should go to Aichi school. We're a university, we don't do that, we do higher level stuff. The second one is the idea that students are sick of it. This is the idea that students have had enough English while they were in school, they don't need any more, we've got to switch it up somehow, we've got to do something different. And the third one is the slightly, to me, mysterious notion that the students already have all the English they need. It's locked in their brains, and all we need to do is provide a magic key through which the English will just flow out. And maybe my tone there is giving you an idea of what I think about that goal. But about that argument. Let me just look at these quickly one by one. The idea that English is not academic, practical English as a language is not academic enough for university. Like I would guess everybody in this audience, I have gone through a number of academic challenges in my life, but I've never done anything that was even remotely as intellectually stimulating, challenging, and rewarding as learning Japanese. I would put it way above my PhD or my master's or anything else that I've ever done. Another thing I thought about just last night, actually, are you familiar with the name Richard Feynman? He's a world-famous physicist, largely, but with the possible exception of Einstein, one of the greatest physicists of the 20th century. Now, he had an amazing career. He never rose to be a plenary at JALT, but he managed to console himself with a Nobel Prize and the Einstein Prize for Physics. A few years ago, I read Richard Feynman's autobiography, which I highly recommend, and he told a story about coming to Japan. And he was doing research in Japan, and he made a concerted effort to learn Japanese. And do you know what happened? He gave up because it was too difficult. He couldn't figure it out. So what you're telling me, what these people are telling me is that something that was too difficult for one of the smartest people who's ever walked the face of this earth is too easy for Japanese students to be studying and somehow beneath them. Yeah, I reject that, and I reject it out of hand. The second one, the students are sick of it. I don't have any quibble that the students are sick of what they've been doing. My quibble is what they've been doing, is whether what they've been doing can be called ELT. Based on my knowledge, again, of other contexts, it can't. I teach in a faculty of education, so I'm constantly in and out of Japanese schools, right from shogako to koko. So I see what goes on. Now, I think if we were going to discuss that in detail, I would need another plenary, and probably we would need another conference. But suffice it to say that what I see happening in Japanese schools bears no resemblance at all to what I would describe as mainstream ELT. So I would say, on the contrary, the problem is not that they've had too much of it, the problem is that they've never had it. All we need to do to switch it up is to give them proper ELT. And then the final one, this idea that they don't need it. A danger of working in the same place for too long with the same students is that you begin to see gaps where gaps are not there. And you also begin to understand students who possibly other people couldn't. Last year at JALT, I was talking to a friend, and he was talking about his PhD research. And he works at a university where the students are streamed into, I think it's something like basic, regular, and advanced. And he was using the advanced students for his PhD research. And he made a recording of them, and he sent it to his PhD supervisor in, I think, the States. And the PhD supervisor wrote back and said, well, this is very nice data, and we can use this for the research, but you've mislabeled the file. You've labeled this as advanced, but the students on this recording are low proficiency beginners. Think about that for a minute. The students who in a Japanese university were labeled as the advanced students, when looked at by somebody from another country, are called low proficiency beginners. Now, you remember I had my 3 goals, and not just English, they're not actually English. I'm not speaking against the other 2, I'm speaking in favour of ELT. I am quite aware that you can justify the not just English approach, and I suspect probably you can even justify the not actually English approach. My point is that you can't justify them like this. And I haven't finished. Sometimes I detect an ugly current, an ugly undercurrent in this. And this undercurrent is that the objections people make have much more to do with the teacher's own complexes than they do with the student's needs. This is something that really, really annoys me, and it's something I've heard much more than I would like to hear. And this is to do with basically What this is teachers who don't know how to teach language, and so they pretend that they were never trying in the first place and say, no, I don't do that, I do something else. To these people I say, no, you're not even an English teacher. Okay, there's my rant over for now. Thank you. So goals have a huge impact on teacher efficacy, because teacher efficacy is about your belief in your ability to achieve goals. Now, whatever your goals are, if you're not clear what they are, you can't develop a sense of teacher efficacy, because you will have no way of knowing whether you're meeting them. Okay, the second thing I want to look at is training, professional development, and particularly qualifications. We have a very strange situation in Japan where the vast majority of people teaching English at Japanese universities are required to have qualifications that have no relevance whatsoever to what they're actually doing, the job that they're actually doing. A few years ago I was working in Nanzan University in Nagoya, and we got money to bring over very high-level teacher trainers, Cambridge teacher trainers from London. And they observed our teachers, and they did workshops, and they did training. And during the workshops, one of them made a very interesting point. He said, we were sitting in a semicircle, as you do, and he said, you know what, it's weird that you guys pay me to come out here to train you, and yet I couldn't work at your university because I don't have a master's. And then he added the point, and you know what, none of you could work in my school in London because you're not qualified. And this is a very good point. I think SIT is one of the sponsors now. I think I'm right in saying that SIT is one of the master's degrees that does have a practical element where you're observed and but the vast majority of masters don't. And even the ones that do, nobody in the hiring process, nobody ever says, does this master's degree have a practical element? Now, if you're talking about full-time teachers, then with a research component, I fully understand this, is no problem at all. But we don't do this. But for part-time teachers, we ask for a master's degree in publications. Why? Why on earth do you need a master's degree in publications to be teaching basic language classes? I don't use basic in a demeaning sense there at all. What's interesting here is that this is, in Japan, Japanese is treated completely differently. So there are two kinds of Japanese. There's the kind of Japanese in terms of unfortunately not three, there are only two of this. There are two strands of the Japanese language. One is what the Japanese people learn in school, and that's called kokugo. And there's another one which is nihongo. And these are different. Kokugo no sensei and nihongo kyoshi, it's a different thing. So in my university, the Nihongo Kyoshi are the people who are teaching international students how to use Japanese in everyday life. Now, I've never heard any suggestion, it would be ridiculed, the idea that one of the teachers from Kokugo could actually go and teach over here. They wouldn't be allowed near it because they're not qualified. Yet in English, we kind of mix it up so that it doesn't, as long as the qualification that you have bears some resemblance to it's either Western or some kind of internationalization thing. Okay, you're an English teacher and you go. And I think this demeans us a lot. And it's a shame because there are practical language teaching qualifications. SIT is one that I know well. The one I know best is CELTA, the Cambridge qualification. I did the CELTA back in 1990, which is kind of scary. But when I worked, my first job was in Singapore, and you couldn't get a visa as a language teacher in Singapore without the CELTA, because you wouldn't be deemed to be qualified for the job that you're doing. When I came to Japan, not only was it not required, nobody knew what it was, nobody had ever heard of it. I think the situation is changing now, and a lot of people around me have started doing the CELTA, and every one of them comes back and raves about it. One of the reasons people have started doing it is that I persuaded my university that for part-time teachers and for contract teachers, we will prefer this to a master's. We're not saying, and we will certainly take it in place of a master's. I would far rather have a part-time teacher who's got the CELTA but no master's than one who's got a master's degree and 10 publications on Japanese literature. It's quite clear that the master's degree is a higher level qualification, but it just doesn't fit. It doesn't fit the criteria of what we're asking them to do. So, one thing you might say about CELTA is it's an elementary thing, it's an introductory thing, there's no point, we don't need to do that, we've been doing it for a long time. When I was working in Nanzan University, I worked with a teacher called Robert Croker, who's not here today because it's his mother's 90th birthday apparently, but Robert, he was inspired by the teacher trainers that we had, and he went off to Australia to do the CELTA. But he'd already been teaching for, I would think, 15 years by this point. And he was very unsure about this. He thought, is this going to be a waste of time and money? Because, you know, what are they going to teach me? I've already been doing it for years. And he came back and he wrote a paper about it, about his experience, which I'll include in the references at the end. And he, yeah, this is what he said in his paper. So this tends to be the reaction of most people who do it, and practical training has a huge effect on teacher efficacy because you're learning the tools that you need to do your job, not some kind of abstract academic qualification that basically is just there to make the university look good. Moving on from qualifications to professional development. The situation regarding professional development is weird in Japan, it's weird. Every other context that I'm aware of, professional development is built into the job, it's part of what you do. If you teach, you're going to be observed. You're going to be observing other people. You're going to be pushed to get more qualifications, and you're going to be attending and giving workshops. Now in Japan, you can do that, certainly, but you don't have to. We have a very unusual situation where you can have teachers who work by themselves for 15 years without ever being observed, without ever observing anyone else, and without ever having been to any kind of workshop or done any kind of professional development. And this is kind of strange. A few years ago, Dorothy Zemek was a plenary at JALT, and while she was here, she and I were talking about this issue of practical training. And she said something interesting. She said, when I came to Japan, JALT was where you went to learn how to teach. And I thought, oh, okay, I'd never really thought about JALT in terms of practical language teacher training. But I mentioned this to Stephen actually, and he said, yeah, duh, that's why Japan has this, JALT has this, that's JALT's catchline. But I think sometimes we forget that. I think that when I look at the JALT chapter presentations, what people are doing, there's a lot of very academic stuff, but I very rarely see anything that you would learn on the CELTA. Basic lesson planning, how to give instructions, classroom management, drilling technique, the kind of things that we need every day. So a quick appeal to JALT chapter presidents. Kind of bear this part of JALT's mission in mind when you invite speakers, and give people some practical training. So practical training is my second point, and particularly qualifications. And we can make a difference here. University administrations don't know what the CELTA is, and I'm saying the CELTA because it's the one I know. I know that there are other equivalents. But if we start saying to university administrations, you know what, for this type of class, for this type of employee, these are the qualifications we need, not these. I've been able to do it even at a national university. Incidentally, this year we took on a teacher who would never normally be employed at a university. He had no university experience, he had no masters, he had no publications, and but he's got the SEPTA. And he's one of the best part-timers I've ever had. By expanding our sense of what is a qualified language teacher, you're going to expand your pool of part-time teachers, which I think is a good thing for everybody. And then of course they become JALT members, so it works for everyone. Okay, the final thing is, the final point is collaboration. Now, you'll recall at the beginning I talked about collective teacher efficacy. As I said, I'm not an expert on this, but I know someone who is. If you're interested in the topic, please look at this book. It's a wonderful book. It does a great job of explaining not only what the concept means, but also why it's important to educators. The book defines collective efficacy like this. So as I said, it's the idea of a group's beliefs rather than an individual's beliefs. Here's an interesting quote from another teacher explaining why we need to know about collective efficacy and why we need to worry about it. I'll give you a second to read that. Okay? The part I want you to notice there is this, because that's quite a strong statement. They're not saying collective efficacy is a valuable thing, it's something we should think about. The greatest factor in influencing learner achievement. Now this is a research finding, and these are findings from a meta-analysis of, I think, more than 400 studies, certainly more than 300, looking at all of these studies that have looked at what affects learner outcomes. Collective efficacy is number one, but that's slightly surprising. But what's even more surprising is how much bigger that effect is than factors like socioeconomic status or parental involvement that we might intuitively think these would be the big ones. But collective efficacy is has three times more an effect on this. So that's the good news. Collective efficacy is clearly an important thing that we need to be aware of. The bad news is that in Japan, teaching is not a team sport. Particularly in universities, it's not a team sport. There is a passionate belief bordering on religious fervor among university teachers that every single teacher has the inalienable right to teach whatever they want in whatever way they want with no external scrutiny whatsoever. It's just something I've built up in Japan over a number of years. In my own university, I have implemented a number of reforms, and how can I put this? They were not without resistance, shall we say. One, ask me later. One faculty actually went to the lengths of writing a letter to the president, and that was the president of the university, not to Donald Trump. They may have written to him as well, but he hasn't tweeted about it yet. But they were basically demanding that all my reforms be abandoned and every teacher be allowed to do whatever they want with no scrutiny whatsoever. My logic was that if we have courses called Eigo Ichi ni San Yon, it might make sense for the teachers of Eigo Ni to know what the teachers in Eigo Ichi did and to have some idea of what the teachers in Eigo San are going to do. No, that's anathema, apparently. Now, it would be nice if the resistance had stopped there, but it didn't. As some of you may be aware, there was a very, very unflattering article about me in a national newspaper earlier this year, which, if it had been true, I would be in prison now. I'm not. I'm still the director of the English Center at Gifu University. But just be aware of how strong the resistance to change can be when it comes to collaboration. And this is a terrible shame, because the thing that we're all interested in, or the thing that we should all be interested in, is improved outcomes. And there is clear evidence that collective efficacy leads to improved outcomes. And you can't have collective efficacy without collaboration. Now, collaboration is a huge word. You can have, it's a spectrum. It can go from a fully coordinated course where everybody's teaching the same thing, all the way to just chatting with your colleagues about what you do in the classroom. But what I found in Japan is that nobody even wants to open that door. At one university where I was working, it dawned on me one day that the only people who actually knew what our program involved were the students, because they were the only ones who'd actually seen all the classes. So I said to my colleagues, wouldn't it be nice if we did a mini FD session and we could all do a little presentation about what we do in our classrooms? The reaction I got to that was similar to the reaction I got from my wife when I suggested that a nice way to spend the weekend might be for her to look after the kids while I pop off to Nagano for some off-road motorcycling fun with my friends from Tokyo. Frosty is the word I would say. And it didn't happen. It didn't happen. And there's it, no, I'm a wonderful teacher, you're a wonderful teacher, we're all wonderful teachers, we don't need to go anywhere beyond that. I think there is this sense of almost terror that you're opening a door and we don't want that door opened. The faculty who wrote the letter to the president, the interesting thing about my reforms is that they don't affect full-time teachers, this is only part-timers. So even for part-timers, they were adamant that no part-timer should be supervised or scrutinized in any way whatsoever. You can kind of imagine what the situation was like before I got involved. The tragedy of this is that I have, in the course of my career over Japan, I've experienced both of these. In the early part of my career, I worked completely autonomously. I was a part-time teacher. I went in, I did my thing, and I talked to other teachers, but I had no idea what they were doing, and I had no idea what my students were doing next. But I've also designed and implemented and managed coordinated programs at Japanese universities, and the latter is much, much better for teacher efficacy than the former. What happens, I mentioned before about Max's research, the idea of autonomy, but there is also a thing called the autonomy trap, which is very easy to fall into in Japan. And this is the idea that you're working in isolation. Basically, you can go one of two ways if you're working in isolation. If you're one of those people who has that voice, that everybody may be doing a better job than you, this is going to be a negative cycle. You're going to go down and down and down. I actually got so bad with this once. I mentioned the CELTA before. Another benefit of the CELTA is that if you get the CELTA, you can go and teach in other countries, And what I did was I went to Oxford in the UK to teach in a summer school. And the first day, my second class on the first day, the director of studies was in the classroom observing me. And I thought, whoa, okay, I'm back in the real world of ELT. But it was great. It was great to get the feedback. And that sense of, okay, what I'm doing is not so bad. My ideas are interesting to other people as well. Oh, what they're doing is quite similar to what I'm doing. It helped me a lot. So I think the autonomy trap, you can get that negative cycle, which leads to burnout, really. A lot of the type of people who are at JALT, what you're going to do about that is you're going to go for professional development, so you collaborate with people, but it's not always so easy to do, particularly if you're a part-timer and you're moving around universities. The second thing is, I said before, when you do the CELTA, you get more tools for your toolbox. The most valuable tool that we have in our toolbox is ideas. And one thing I've noticed about coordinated programs is that the conversation in the staff room changes. The no we can't group disappears because I've fired them all, or they've quit. But even the ones who remain, they change to how are we going to do this group. And when you have teachers teaching the same thing, everybody comes out of the classroom and naturally the conversation is what we did in the classroom. In my first job in Singapore, I was working in a school called In Lingua, and we had a dreadful syllabus and dreadful materials, but we had an incredible resource, which was the staff room. There were 40 teachers in the staff room. So you would get your timetable and you would stand up and you'd say, I'm doing present perfect B. Has anybody else done this? And 10 hands would go up. I've got a song for it. I've got a worksheet for it. Here's an exercise I made for it. And that begins to happen when you've got coordination. And in my university now, we often get teachers, I'll write some materials and teachers will come back and they'll say, oh, there's a good YouTube video for this. Did you know about it? I didn't know about it, thanks. But now everybody knows about it. So that's one huge benefit. And the final one is just camaraderie. Going back to Max's point about colleagues, it's not a team sport, but I think most humans tend to function better in teams. And I think that the support that we can give each other and just the sense that what you're doing as part of a team is an enormously important thing. So those are my claims about the benefits of collaboration. One point I would like to make though is, when I talk about collaboration, who am I talking about? And I want to go back to Max's research here again. Every university that I've worked at, any change that I've been able to implement has been done with the help of the administration. Okay, I'm talking about the office staff, I'm talking about the higher up people. These are the people who know where the magic money tree is. These are the people who can make things happen. They can make classes appear and disappear. If you are serious about making change in your university, you need to get the administration on board, and you need to make them understand what you're trying to do, and you need to make them share your goals. Once they share your goals, all kinds of stuff happens. When we set up the English teacher, I was told there was no budget for furniture or computers. Suddenly $1 million yen appeared, and I asked the guy in charge, where did this $1 million yen come from? And he said, don't ask. Okay, cool. You make $1 million yen appear, that's good for me. So another point about this is that if you're a full-time teacher working with part-time teachers, please remember that it's part of your job to ensure that channels of communication exist between the administration and the part-time teachers. Because if they don't, your part-time teachers are going to end up with a reduced sense of teacher efficacy. I think, again, there's a huge spectrum in Japan here. Some universities have a full-timer who is responsible for an indirect contact with part-time teachers. Other people are just told, get on with it. When I joined my university, the place I work at the moment, we would have teachers who would say, and we would say, you're teaching Eichi. And they would say, what's Eichi? And we would say, I don't know, what do you want it to be? And it was literally at that level. So those are my three points. And as I said, these are partly my obsession with the number 3, but partly I think that these are the ones that give you bang for your buck. And the reason they do that is partly because they have a huge impact on teacher efficacy, but also because we don't do them very well in Japan, in my opinion. You may well disagree. Going back to the conference theme, I'm talking about teacher efficacy today, and I'll be talking about learner agency tomorrow. I must admit that in the past I've been a little bit skeptical about the need for a conference theme. And just between us, there have been years where I presented at JALT without actually knowing what the conference theme was. Absolutely disgraceful behaviour. This year's different, partly because I'm giving a plenary speech on it, so you would hope I would know what it was. But more than that, Stephen and Catherine's passion for this topic was kind of infectious, and it got me thinking about why we have conference themes. And I think the reason is that, or the conclusion I came to, is that a conference theme gives you a lens through which to view the whole conference. I think when I was looking at just the list of featured and plenary speakers, the range of experience and the range of context there is huge. And it's even wider when you bring in all the other presenters as well. And I think that there's a danger in a conference of going through and having so much stuff coming out that you kind of, that none of it sticks. And I think that the teacher efficacy is an excellent lens through which to view the conference. And I think if you go around the conference and watch all the presentations and think, how does this relate to teacher efficacy? How does this connect with learner agency? Then I think you'll end up taking away more from the conference than you would have done otherwise. So my hope for the conference, and I know Stephen and Catherine's hope for the conference as well, is there are 3 hopes you'll be surprised to hear. The first one is that you have a much clearer understanding of what teacher efficacy and learner agency are. My talk today is particularly about teacher efficacy. The second is that you will have a stronger sense of where your own teacher efficacy is in different contexts and what affects it. And then finally, that you'll have some ideas for concrete steps that you can take to improve it. So, thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to meeting and talking with you.